Today we're going to be giving a French whiskey a try to see if it's any good. I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd, and like I said, this week I'm going to be looking at a French whiskey to see if it's any good. Now I have reviewed on the channel a few French whiskies before and they haven't been great. Now don't get me wrong, French people, they make a lot of nice things. They make nice wine, they make nice brandy. I haven't tried a French whiskey yet that has really made me think, well, the French know how to make good whiskey. So hopefully I found one here. This is from the Tessendier and Fille, or Tessendier and Son, or Sons Whiskey Distillery. So they're, I said whiskey distillery. They're not actually a whiskey distillery. They are a distillery. They make brandies, they make rums, they make gins, they make a lot of different things, and they have also started making whiskey. They started making whiskey a little while back, and they've made this here, which is a French single malt whiskey. France isn't exactly known for their whiskey distilling history or lineage, so hopefully this is going to be pretty good. It is, I've looked at the distillery, they're kind of interesting, so I'll read out what it says on the bottle. So it is obviously made with malted barley that was distilled in traditional stills, or as they would say, alembics, which is the French word for stills. Now I've looked up, their stills are actually what are called Charentais Stills. I'll put a picture of what they look like up there. They don't look like traditional kind of swan neck stills. It's like 3 different parts, and I'll see if I can find a cross section of how it looks, and I'll put that up there as well. Very interesting kind of style of still. I'm not sure if it makes a huge difference, but it looks like there's a lot of copper contact in there, and typically copper contact, when you're making whiskey, copper, it removes like the sulfurous bad compounds, the bad flavors from a whiskey. So the more copper contact you can get, typically the better the spirit will be on the end of the distillery. So because it looks like there's a lot of copper contact in those stills, hopefully that means it's a pretty good looking or good tasting whiskey at the end of it. They do say here that it's 3 years old, that was aged in French wood barrels or French oak barrels, then finished in a bourbon barrel. And what's interesting about that is, I wouldn't say they used virgin oak because that color is very, very light. So I would say that those French oak barrels they used may have had like cognac, or they may have had brandy, they may have had something in there beforehand that kind of took a lot of that oaky color, because that is a very, very light color. And then it was, obviously they said it was finished in a bourbon cask, so it's going to give you a bit of sweetness, a bit of brightness, maybe some vanilla, maybe a bit of fruity notes into there as well. And that's kind of all there is I've been able to find about this whiskey. I mean, it is near enough to Bastille Day, which is why I decided I would review a French whiskey, because this was the only French whiskey I had in my collection that I had not reviewed yet. And Bastille Day is the French kind of version of Independence Day, their own kind of day where the French Republic was, I suppose, founded. So I decided to review a French whiskey. It even says on the bottle, Whisky Francais, which is French whiskey, so you can't get any more French than that. So let's go in for the nose on the French whiskey, the Whisky Francais from the Tessendier Distillery. Cheers. I don't immediately hate it. Now, the other whiskies I've tried, some of them used what's called buckwheat. They used a different type of like grain in there than malted barley, and that was a bit weird. This here though, I don't hate it. It's definitely a malt whiskey. It's kind of like, now they say on the here that you'll get like acidic or like tangy pears with some strawberry bonbons or strawberry sweets, and I mean, I get a bit of the pears, I get a bit of like apples and pears, those kind of orchard fruits that I would expect from malted barley, but what I'm not really getting is like the roasted, toasted grains, like that biscuity, malty note I would normally associate with a malted barley. It almost feels more like a grain whiskey. It almost feels like it's definitely sweet, there's a bit of fruitiness, but that kind of biscuity note isn't really there that I would normally associate with a malt. Now, obviously malt, depending on the way you malt it, depending on how wet you make the grains, depending on how long you let them germinate and how you dry them, at the temperature you dry them, all the different characteristics can change malt. Like you can get biscuity malt, you can get herbal malt, you get a lot of different flavors, but I'm not really getting a huge amount of malt here. I'm just getting like kind of grain sweetness, which is why I would imagine this, if I wasn't being told this was 100% orge maltais or malted barley, that I wouldn't be expecting this to actually be a fully malt whiskey. Like it is nice and fruity. There's a bit of like orange peel, a bit of like those kind of like bourbon cask notes, but I'm not getting a huge bourbon influence. I'm not getting like the heavy hit of like butterscotch, vanilla, caramel, those kinds of things. It's just a nice enough light whiskey with some definitely the fruity notes. The fruity notes are the biggest notes. I'm not sure if they're coming from the malt itself or if that's from like that French oak, the first cask goes there. I'm not sure if that is. So I'm gonna go in for the palate, see if it stays as light, see if it stays as kind of fruity, or if I get some of that malt. Cheers. It's still quite light on the palate, like up front. I mean, it is only 40% alcohol by volume, so it isn't the heaviest of whiskies, but quite light, quite fruity. Again, I would say that this was a grain whiskey. I'd say it's on that lighter side. It's not an unpleasant whiskey, it's just very light. So like you get a big flash of like that fruity pear note, and you get maybe, I wouldn't say like a fresh strawberry. I think the way they described it as a strawberry bonbon or strawberry sweet, where you get that almost artificial strawberry flavor. I'm getting that a little bit in here. Yeah, but it's quite up and down. Like you get a big, not a big burst, but you get a burst of flavor and then it fades away. So I'm gonna go in again, see if I can pick out more and more of those flavors. Cheers. Okay, I let that sit in my palate for a little while longer there, and I did get a bit more of like the oak character. So there, like I said, it's probably not using virgin oak, but I did get a bit of like oak spice. I got a bit of like, I wouldn't say cinnamon, I wouldn't say clove, I'd say like almost like star anise or almost like cardamom, with those kind of like earthy spices, not like a big bright spice, not like a baking spice, but like an earthy spice that you might use for cooking. Like those kind of, there's a little bit of that spice coming through, but mostly it's just light, it's sweet, it's fruity. It wouldn't be the strongest whiskey, but it has a nice bit of flavor. And on the finish, I'm finally getting a little bit of malt, so I'm going to go in again this time, focus on the finish and see what lasts the longest. Cheers. Okay, so like I said, up front you get a big hit of sweetness. You don't get a huge mouthfeel. It's only 40%. You're not going to get a huge mouthfeel. It's only 3 years old. You're not going to get a huge amount of depth of flavor. You just get a bit bright hit of like sweetness, a bright hit of like that fruity note, and then that all fades away. Like you get a little bit of like citrus, you get a little bit of sweetness, and then on the finish, as I'm taking a breath, I'm getting like a little bit of like that biscuity grain that I associate with a malted barley. So I'm getting a little bit of that malty note at the end, but ultimately it's quite light, quite a short finish. Like as I'm talking now, I'm breathing now, not getting a huge amount of flavor. Like a little bit is lingering on, like you'd have a taste of anything you just drank, but not really a long finish on the whiskey. Before I give my final thoughts on this, if you're new here, scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button. I put out whiskey reviews like this every Wednesday, and I put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey every Friday. So if you want to see more like that, make sure you hit subscribe and leave me a note in the comments and say if there's any whiskies you think I should review in future. If there's any holidays coming up for different countries that you think I should mark, like Bastille Day with this French whiskey, let me know if there are any whiskies you think I should review. But now, my final thoughts on this. It's a whiskey and it's French. As it says on the bottle, it's French whiskey. It is not bad. It's probably the best French whiskey I've had, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good whiskey, if that makes sense. Like, it is inoffensive. It's nice, it's light. If you told me it was a grain whiskey, I believe you. It doesn't really have a huge malty impact. It's only 3 years old, so it doesn't have a huge amount of cask influence. The casks they use based on that colouring was probably on the lighter side, probably like a reused cognac or brandy cask and a reused bourbon cask. So you can get just kind of lighter flavours coming through. It's not bad though, quite nice kind of in terms of the fruity note. I like that little flavour. I wonder if it was at a higher ABV or if it was a little bit older, if I'd get more of like the oak notes, more of those cask influence with that kind of fruitiness of the spirit. That might be a nice way to go. If I'm ever near the Tessendier and Fields distillery, I might pop in and give them a try, or if I ever see any more of their whiskies, I might give it a try based on the fact that this here kind of entry-level whiskey isn't bad. Maybe that means their better whiskies are going to be a bit better. But that's just my thoughts. If you've ever tried anything from this distillery, or if you've ever tried any French whiskey yourself, let me know down below what you think of them, or if there are any French whiskies you think I really should try, let me know, because I'm always on the lookout for new whiskies. But right now, like I said, pretty inoffensive little whiskey, so I think I'll keep on enjoying it, and I'll see you next time. Sláinte.